I know I swore off reviewing mediocre movies. Sorry. First up, this will be as spoiler-free as I can make it, but there are some things I want to address, and I feel they're worth addressing because this is allegedly the final chapter in the all-encompassing Skywalker Saga, which encapsulates the prequels, the original trilogy, and this sequel trilogy. And I'll get to my overarching point, but let me first go over what worked about this film for me, and then I'll get into what most definitely didn't. Everyone is giving it their all in this movie. You know, acting, but also in terms of behind the camera, with the spectacle. This is some of the most well-constructed space battle action that this series has ever had. The acting is very much these people deserve a much better movie built around them. Daisy Ridley is carrying this movie as best as she can because she is without doubt our focal character. Everything is kind of, all circumstances are kind of orbiting around her and her destiny, so to speak. So she has to be able to kind of convey and carry as much of this film as she is able to, and for the most part, she does a very commendable job at it. Again, it's not really any fault of her as an actress. It has more to do with what I'll get into later, which is the ramshackle kind of start and stop and multiple threads involved in this plot, not adding up to much. John Boyega and Oscar Isaac make for a great resistance duo here, and you can tell all these core three main characters have a lot of good chemistry together. It's good to see Billy Dee back on the big screen. He looks like he's having a ball, and I'm so glad to see him being energetic. This really isn't a spoiler, since his presence in the film has been touted since the very beginning of marketing, but Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor, again, he returns. He's having a lot of fun with what little his character is given to do. The Emperor's always been a fun character. And Ian McDiarmid just knows how to just go for the ham, and you appreciate him going for the ham because some ham is needed to liven the festivities here. Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. There is that moment in one of the final trailers where he has sort of an emotional high point, and that is something of an emotional high point in the context of the film, and he's able to deliver it. This is without a doubt the most kind of real version of C-3PO we've had for a long time, because he's sort of been in the background for most of the sequel trilogy and a fair amount of the prequel trilogy. So it's good to see I just can't even 3PO back. And Anthony Daniels is always great at I just can't even 3PO. I did get emotional about 3 times in this movie. The first time was in response to a scene involving Adam Driver as Kylo Ren, where his character reaches something of a turning point, and he has to kind of have this conversation that I wasn't expecting. So bravo on that for surprising me there, Abrams. But it is a very soft-spoken and well-acted scene that got me here a little bit. So emotional scene number 2 involves a flashback to some of our original trilogy characters. It's a very brief flashback, not a lot of dialogue save for a voiceover of a character describing what's going on in said flashback, and it's just good, let's put it this way, to see some fairly decent digital likenesses on the screen. I did castigate Rogue One for its creepy CGI puppetry. It's at least not too prevalent in this flashback, so good on you there for keeping it as minimal as possible, Abrams. And emotional scene number 3, there's a point in the movie, about halfway through the film, Chewie just has a full-on emotional breakdown, and it's really well done. It's, in fact, out of these 3 moments, it is the moment that sticks out to me the most, and it makes the most sense for that character to go through this gauntlet of just agony over something that transpires in the movie. Man, Chewie, I'm sorry, dude. If you are a diehard fan or even a casual fan, you'll find something to enjoy in it. I found some things to enjoy in it. Just overall, there's a lot of stuff that really didn't add up to my enjoyment over this last installment. And that's coming from someone who enjoyed The Force Awakens and actually enjoyed The Last Jedi. I'll agree that there's a lot of issues with that film, a lot of plot and character things that could have been handled a lot better, but the ideas overall were ideas that I was intrigued to see get follow through in the Star Wars universe. And then this film, kind of in an effort to salvage itself after the reception of the previous installment, I feel just clean slated everything and undid those ideas and for the sake of, hey, remember what it was like to be this in Star Wars? Let's try to do this again, except half-heartedly. All right, it seems like I'm veering into more of my critical and not so glowing recommendations on this movie, so let's just get right into what absolutely doesn't work for me. Just from a filmmaking standpoint, the editing in this movie is some of the most jangled and disjointed I've seen in the Star Wars franchise overall, especially in the first, I want to say, 10 minutes of the film. It's all about, it's montage galore in the first 10 minutes of the movie, which is kind of weird to have that be your opening. The opening starts with Kylo Ren on this mission, and it is just, okay, he's here, now he's here again, now he's here. You know what, pacing, not needed. Let's just have lighting and strobing effects, which weren't as bad as what they were touting up in the articles about saying, careful if you have epilepsy. Boy, those lighting effects sure help with disjointed editing. It's so noticeable, and no more so is it noticeable than with Carrie Fisher. It's great to see her, you know, in this final hurrah. There's something about the scenes they shoot with her, at least with her stock footage, because that's how she's included in the movie, is that she has leftover footage from Last Jedi and Force Awakens that they incorporate into this new narrative. And so she's interacting with Rey, she's interacting with Poe and other characters. And there's something about the way these scenes and the dialogue especially are constructed to accommodate her image, but also her dialogue. And you get the sense of like, this is a weird way of saying this to her until your brain kind of switches on and says, they have to say it this way to accommodate her pre-recorded response to something that was probably completely different in the context of Last Jedi or Force Awakens. So whenever they edit around her image or her stand-in, which is a very obvious stand-in, sorry, that in this marvel of special effects, her Plan 9 from Outer Space Bela Lugosi stand-in is very noticeable to me. Might not be noticeable to everyone, but it's noticeable to me. It's weird how they construct the edits around her scenes to a point where it felt almost a little kind of macabre and disrespectful, because you do have that knowledge of the actress is dead and they're doing everything they can to kind of shoehorn as much imagery of her into the movie as possible where it might not necessarily be needed. She's in this way more than I thought she was going to be, and I'm kind of wishing the nostalgia baiting for Carrie Fisher's image was reined in a little bit more. As much as I love her and this character and seeing this character, it just felt awkward and weird with regards to the edits of the scenes. If you had gone into this movie without the knowledge of Carrie Fisher's passing, I have a feeling even you would kind of say there's something off about these scenes. The way they cut to her and the way they cut away from her. There's something just off kilter with regards to the way they set up Princess Leia scenes. General Leia, I should say, sorry. Much love, Carrie. But I feel that's indicative overall of a lot of issues that take place in this movie and kind of stems to the whole goal of this sequel trilogy overall, is that it's now more apparent than ever that the sequel trilogy was started without an endgame in mind. Pun intended to Marvel, I don't know. JJ came in with episode 7, set up ideas, but had no idea how he was going to conclude those ideas and didn't care because it wasn't going to be his bag anymore after he handed off to Rian Johnson for Last Jedi. Rian Johnson said, hey, I've got my own ideas. I don't like some of these mysteries that you've set up, these mystery boxes that you're so known for setting up, JJ. I'm just gonna do away with them immediately in this film. Snoke, who he is, his motivations, how he and Kylo Ren met, what his power levels really are, doesn't matter. Let's get rid of them. And on some level, I kind of like that, initially, that subversion of expectations, until you then realize, like, what are they going to do for this next installment? Because Last Jedi, more so than this film, feels like it's wrapping up things in the second portion of a trilogy. And like I mentioned in my Last Jedi review a couple years back, the ending is a very Disney-ish ending of like, now the power of the Force and destiny belongs to anyone, even you kids. So when they brought JJ back, JJ's like, oh crap, I didn't intend to end this trilogy. I have to wrap up stuff now. I'm not very good at wrapping up stuff. And I'm sorry to say, his ability to wrap up lengthy stories that he starts off with, he hasn't risen to the occasion yet. He's good as a one and done director for franchise films like Mission Impossible or like Star Trek, but when it comes to continuing or furthering stories in a franchise, let's say he hasn't been the best at that. This movie feels like a mad scramble to incorporate as much Star Wars lore as they can accommodate, to tie everything together, even things that maybe initially weren't meant to be tied together. And a lot of that, unfortunately, includes the Emperor, who feels very much so Even when the marketing first came out, my brain was like, yeah, this is a last-minute addition. They're trying to really grab you with the nostalgia now because they're bringing back this character who I have a strong feeling wasn't meant to be brought back. Like, oh, this character that you love from the originals and the prequels, we're gonna bring him back just this one last time, even though we really didn't have a set place for him in this new saga. A lot of his scenes, as much as I love Ian McDiarmid's acting and the menace he can convey with this character, a lot of his scenes add up to a whole zero sum. And it ties in a lot with other characters. It ties in a lot with Kylo Ren's journey, ties in a lot with Rey's journey. And this isn't a big spoiler, but the fleet of Star Destroyers, that's the big threat. This franchise can't get away from planet destroying. Now all these Star Destroyers have the ability to wipe out a planet just on their own. It makes you kind of wonder why they didn't just lead with that instead of having a big moon and planet bases, but whatever. It just feels like there is a lot going on in this film. If they'd given it more forethought about planning out the trilogy, there are plot elements and side quests and character beats that you could have spread out over 3 movies. If you wanted to bring back Palpatine, if that was their intent all along, they could have done that effectively over a 3-movie period. You don't have to tip the hat right away and reveal him in the first film. The original trilogy didn't do that. The original trilogy probably didn't have initially plans for him, but as Empire Strikes Back was going along, they realized, okay, there's something we could do with this character later on. So they probably scripted and structured that movie out with the intent of being able to successfully wrap up everything in Jedi. The journey of Darth Vader to redemption wasn't necessarily something maybe that George Lucas set up with the first movie. He was just trying to get his property out there and be received well. After that first movie comes out, then other writers that were brought on and other creatives were able to kind of take the story and mold it to say, like, what are our plans for this long term? Here, everything feels just slapped in there. Reveals regarding Rey and her place in the grander scheme. At first, you're kind of like, that's the obvious thing they can do. And you're right, for the most part, but there's no build up into it. There's no leading along that, oh, this is where she was intending all along. And I'm not saying that J.J. Abrams has to hold our hand through her journey necessarily, that J.J. Abrams has to be purposefully dropping blatant clues here and there. It just feels like, let's do this with her character in this last installment because it's going to pay off someone out there. It's going to pay off their fan theories. It's weird because I feel a lot of this movie is really trying to make up for the last installment, trying to do away with some things that were given very little prospects in the previous installment. And because it spends so much time on that, the narrative side of this movie struggles. And I wouldn't care so much about it. I probably wouldn't even be reviewing it so much if it wasn't for the fact that Disney and Lucasfilm decided to retroactively go back and say that this has been building up across these 9 movies, that this was the goal all along when it clearly wasn't with these new set of films. I wouldn't have minded having a new trilogy of films that were completely disconnected from the originals and from the prequels. But because they wanted to have their cake and eat it too with regards to pulling in new fans with a new mythos, but still not losing the old fans and servicing them with fan moments and original characters and all these little Easter eggs meant solely for the most hardcore of Star Wars fans, they found themselves tethered to that original trilogy and to the prequels. There's a lot of lip service given to the prequels in this movie. It's not able to be its own thing, unfortunately. It's not able to take this franchise in a new direction and forever has it bound to this idea of good and purely evil always butting heads. That's why I kind of liked stories, smaller stories like Rogue One, like Solo, like what I have gleaned from The Mandalorian whenever I do find copies of it to watch, because I'm not paying for Disney Plus. It's about a smuggler. It's about these operatives just trying to do one little objective. It's about a bounty hunter just trying to stay alive. I would love to have more movies at least built around the premise of exploring this universe more so than always having to come back to this good and evil struggle. Maybe we'll get that down the line, but I don't know if I have the investment to really care anymore because I kind of feel like the veil's been lifted on where Star Wars is going, and I'm just tired. It has nothing really to do with the quality of the films themselves. Like I said, there's a lot to like visually, acting-wise, idea-wise, but you can't help but, as an older person, see the marketing machine behind everything now. It's so blatant what Rise of Skywalker is doing with regards to its half-hearted nostalgia grabs in order to keep the old fan base happy, but still wanting to kind of push things further with new fans and not really striking that balance like they did with Force Awakens, because they're trying to wrap up stuff as well, even though I still feel like we haven't gotten to know these new characters. It's really made me just cynical with the way I view these movies being made. Maybe not so much the actual mythology and lore of the universe itself. In fact, I kind of, day by day, find myself caring less about the mythology surrounding a character like Rey or a character like Darth Vader. All I see now are the writing and executive decisions that brought these characters from point A to point B and immediately to Z. And I know that's probably a depressing prospect, to finally detach myself from the wild and weird fantasy of Star Wars and just see it now as product, pure product, even though that's what it's always been. It always felt like it staved off being solely product. It changed the way movies were made, certainly. It changed what we thought of a blockbuster being. It changed what we thought of with regards to merchandising and tie-ins. But we didn't care. We had toys. We had the expanded universe of graphic novels like Dark Empire, which I'll admit, I got a little jazzed that some aspects of the Emperor stuff seem to have a sort of a Dark Empire-ish vibe to them. To novels, the Zahn novels, to furthering the story of the characters to the point where they grew up, they had families, they had kids and grandkids. I want to wrap up on one aspect of the movie and my viewpoint on how these films are now built and marketed. And that is, Time magazine posted a very clickbaity article regarding the fact that this movie has the first same-sex kiss between characters in a Star Wars movie. It's blink and you'll miss it, folks. It's 0.5 seconds in the background, not involving even like characters who have more than one line of dialogue. It is completely tertiary to everything else that's going on. Honestly, it's something that I feel was shot in a way that they could easily edit it out so that they could market the film towards other countries that might not be as receptive to LGBTQ representation. And that really kind of has colored my perception of not just Star Wars, but big franchise films and how I perceive them now as an adult, is that the media or the studio themselves will tout up some kind of inclusion, some kind of representation, but when you actually see it, it's just a bone. It's just thrown out there to possibly appease anybody momentarily. They did that with, what's his name from the live-action Beauty and the Beast, LeFou, touting him as the first out character in a Disney film, and it didn't amount to anything. It amounted to him dancing with a guy for like 3 seconds. I'm not saying, like we need to play into stereotypes or we need to like take this to some explicit places with regards to representation, but it's very indicative of what I'm coined as being Disney tokenism, wherein they say they want this. They say they want to be inclusive and they want to incorporate all these perspectives and stories from all walks of life, but ultimately they're like, well, history has shown that this doesn't sell tickets, this doesn't sell toys, this doesn't sell the merchandise or get the marketing, recoup the marketing for it. So we'll put it in there, but we don't want to make it front and center. That's just one aspect now that I'm aware of with regards to how Disney makes these films and how they market them. And I'm sorry to say that it has very much painted my perception of Star Wars and other associated franchises in a more cynical and critical light. I can't go back to just enjoying them as silly space adventures. I don't know. I'm kind of burnt out on the franchise. This started with some promise. Force Awakens had some potential to go somewhere, and ultimately I don't feel it fulfilled on that promise. And then I feel it worsened because they went back and said it's going to fulfill not just on the promise of this new trilogy, but on Star Wars as a whole. And it really, I don't feel does that. Is it a terrible film? No. It is enjoyable in parts. It's perfectly serviceable. If you are a fan or just casual even, this is a perfectly fine kind of casual sci-fi romp that you can enjoy. But with regards to the legacy of this franchise, with regards to how this installment is supposed to kind of speak for and represent everything that's come before, and especially with how this is the most by committee product that I've seen from this franchise so far. It's forever kind of skewed my perspective on Star Wars. I still like it. I still think it's got some great worlds, great characters, great moments, but I certainly won't look at it the same way again. I hope you all enjoy it. You know, I don't want to be poo-pooing on anyone's parade just because I didn't get as much out of it as others might. If you get a lot out of viewing Rise of Skywalker, good on you. I hope it's everything that you expect from it. I just feel as though, I don't know, there is a sense of finality now, but more in the sense of like, I think I don't need any more from Star Wars. I'm good. So may the Force be with you wherever it takes you.